Hans, will you be
Yeah.
introducing the panel? Okay.
Yeah. 1 minute. We'll be starting now. Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this panel discussion on Equality Means Business, organized by the Women in Management Club at IIM Bangalore as a part of the 8th edition of Women Leadership Summit. Women in Management is a student-run club founded in 2014 to encourage women to find their rightful place in industry, entrepreneurship, and academia. We believe in promoting gender equality and diversity in all spheres. The club is dedicated to creating a supportive and inclusive community that empowers women to realize their full potential. We organize various activities throughout the year, including workshops, networking events, and panel discussions, all aimed at fostering leadership skills and promoting gender diversity. The importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace has gained significant attention in recent years. Companies prioritizing diversity and inclusion have been shown to perform better financially, be more innovative, and have better employee retention rates. At the heart of this conversation is the belief that everyone should have equal opportunities, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or any other factor that may lead to discrimination. When prioritizing, equality leads to better outcomes for everyone, not just those historically in positions of power. Today's panelists are accomplished leaders from various industries who have made it their mission to advocate for workplace equality. On behalf of Women in Management, I'm so happy to introduce them to you. We have with us Ms. Padma Parthasarathi, Senior Vice President at Tech Mahindra. She's currently setting up Centers of Excellence for Sustainability and Social Initiatives at Mahindra University. An alumna of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad, Padma has played roles in consulting, technology, sales, and strategy, and has handled multiple P&L management responsibilities during a career spanning more than 30 years. Welcome, ma'am. We also have with us Ms. Aparna, Senior Vice President of Risk Management for Asia Pacific at HSBC. She has 19 years of experience in risk management and analytics across financial services and consulting. She's a champion of D&I in workplace and has been a chair of the Women's Network at the organizations she had worked with. Aparna holds an EMBA from INSEAD and has a Master's in Operations Research from Virginia Tech. Welcome, ma'am. Joining them is Ms. Tina Vinod, a diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist and consultant, a belonging advocate, and a storyteller. Tina's 22 plus years of diverse experience helps organizations look DEI as a strategic investment with a people-first approach. Tina helped operationalize the diversity, equity, and inclusion function in ThoughtWorks India and headed DEI for ThoughtWorks globally. Tina is currently playing the role of a DEI strategist and consultant at ThoughtWorks. Welcome, ma'am. And the panel also has Ms. Shruti Harikrishna, an IIMB alumnus with over 17 years of experience in strategy consulting, analytics, program management, and technology. With a career spread across multiple domains and companies like Tesco, Flipkart, and Dell, she had recently been the head of international DE and analytics at Adobe. She's also an avid blogger with over 50K readers in the popular parenting site. Her blog was chosen to be amongst the top 10 articles of 2015, and her article on funny parenting stories was published in the Deccan Herald. Welcome, ma'am. I extend a warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's panelists will share their experiences, insights, and strategies for creating a more equitable and inclusive work environment. I hope their perspectives will inspire us all to act and work towards a more equitable future. Our moderator for the panel discussion is Professor Manaswini Bhalla, an associate professor in economics at IIM Bangalore. Her primary areas of interest lies in information economics, focusing on pricing, corporate culture, and political economy issues. She's a strong advocate of equality in the workplace. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
We encourage everyone to engage in a constructive dialogue during the session and learn from each other. We believe that by coming together to discuss these issues, we can create a more inclusive and supportive community that empowers everyone to succeed. Once again, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you will find this panel discussion enlightening and informative. Also, All the attendees, please do use the Q&A option to send your questions to the host of the meeting. Over to you, Manswini, ma'am.
Thank you, Ans, and thank you for all the words and kind words to all the panelists as well as to me. And thank you for setting the tone. It's a pleasure to host this panel. In company of such highly accomplished women, I feel the warmth already, though we are quite far away. We hope this conversation will be very exciting, not only for us as panelists, but also for all the listeners who will probably take home some actionables for themselves so that they can glide through this current workplace and maybe make it a little more diverse than it is. All right, thank you once again. We'll spend the first 40 minutes talking amongst ourselves, and then we'll spend the next 20 in taking up some questions as we proceed. All right, so I begin by highlighting that I'll start by telling you, most of you would know, but for the benefit of our students, that, well, there is an academic record research, which is extensive research across different spectra of management, economics, and social sciences that has proven that having a more diverse workforce increases firm performance. And I won't get into the statistics of, even if you look at a narrow definition of diversity, looked at it through the lens of only gender, there's enough evidence out there that proves that there's an economic case to have a more gender diverse corporate world. Unfortunately, we still find it dismal, very little, not much being done, or let's say the stats are not there for us to believe that women representation at the workforce is at the level where we would like it to be. So, women constitute about 48% of our population. And we still have about the CMI work report would say that the total labor force participation in India is just 20%. And if you go up the tech, echelon of this, senior management executive levels, things get even more narrower. Just about 4% of CEOs and management MDs of listed companies are, in females. So there's lots of work to be done. Though there's lots already done, but there's lots of work to be done. So before we get into the different aspects of gender diversity, how do we look at it, and what steps the corporate and the world and the government have done, it would be only appropriate, to begin by assessing the ground that we're treading into. So I would request Tina, if you would, give us, shed some light on what you think if you think that the corporate world is a level playing field for women. Yeah, and you feel free to use stats, and if you want to share screen, and you can go ahead and do that. And yeah.
Sure. So all of us know about the World Economic Forum Global Gender Gap Report, right? It's going to take us 132 years to close the gender gap. When you look at data from a recent LinkedIn Opportunity Index report, 22% working women in India said that their companies exhibit a favorable bias towards men. 85% of working women claim to have missed out on a raise promotion compared to the regional average of 60%. 50% of women quit tech or quit the workforce and never get back. And these are statistics that are available everywhere. But the reality is that, it's not a level playing field. There are so many inequities that are there. But it's also true that we have multiple identities, and we bring those multiple identities to the workplace, be it, our educational background, our religion, or it could even be, our societal differences that we have, whether the economical backgrounds that we come from, a social conditioning, or it could be things like cognitive, how we process information, or it could be different aspects like age, it could be gender identity, it could be sexual orientation, how we work, which occupation we choose, the relationships we have, class, caste, and so many other inequities. And I have personally seen these intersections in the workplace and how they play out, right from graduates that we hire. And here I'm going to focus on men and women and not the entire gender spectrum. But I have seen that, even though students come from the same college, you would see that the girls do not fare as good as the boys when you look at, and I've been working very closely, with students in some of my past roles. And when I asked the girls, why aren't you all as hands-on as the boys when it comes to writing code? They said, we have to travel back home by 6 every day because it's not safe for us to travel after that, and our parents don't give us permission, whereas the boys get to use the lab, the college lab, and code far longer. They go out for open source events. And so you would see that there is inequity, although you may belong to the same caste, based on gender. And then you would see how caste plays a significant role as well, because I have seen, organizations hire not from just one set of colleges, right? You would see organizations hire from, rural colleges, from urban, semi-urban colleges. And there also you would see that students who come from colleges, there is an intersection of caste. And you would see such an inequity played out there. And I have been privy to some of these things. We think untouchability isn't there. It is very much there in rural India. And so some of these intersections that play out when it comes to caste, class, access, how well you speak English, plays out in the workplace in different ways. And, I was recently with Embrace Equity being the theme for this Women's History Month, I was thinking about what exactly does equity mean in our workplaces today? And it's very clear that gender equity transcends equality. And historically, our world is tilted in favor of men, and most workplaces have been designed for men and by men. So with gender bias embedded in its practices, culture, and ethos through decades, the undoing will take time. The only thing is that there's a lot more effort and a lot more intention towards doing it today.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks that you brought out this aspect of multidimensional identity right at the forefront, because that's something that probably we had a conversation about, and I had a conversation about that and this is something that we hope that we will be able to put across, that it depends upon which aspect of your identity you highlight in which arena, and it keeps changing and evolving. And by the way, it's an open, it's open for more academic research for sure. But I'll change gear and I'll request Padma. Padma, you've been extensively working on a lot of exciting projects in D&I and workshops across the globe, and I was wondering if you could shed light on what do you think are the broad entry barriers, that look, Tina mentioned that it doesn't look, stats look tilted. Now, what do you think are our, major entry barriers that women face to break the, so-called glass ceiling in your own experience? Do you think they are social, mental, or any other economical? If you could highlight, what do you think in your own experience?
So it is multidimensional, like you said. So as Tina said, it is in multiple areas. So at the entry level, obviously, there are restrictions about, women and where they're allowed to work, and allowed is something that seems to be there for women all the time, right? So about which cities they can work in, where they can travel to, etc. And families do tend to put constraints on them. So it is, if you get a job in a very remote location or maybe even overseas, the woman may not be able to take it up. So that starts at that level. The good thing is, at least in the IT sector, we see that the intake of women is probably more than 50% today. So we have a good intake of women at that level. It's after that I think some of the barriers start to become higher and higher. And this is where, and I think it was a very interesting thing that one of the people in our HR team talked about. And he said, diversity is getting an invite to a party. Inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. And belonging is when you're free to dance as if nobody's looking at you, right? So, and those three things are very, very different. So, so the fact is that, yes, we've got diversity. We've now got a lot of women in the workforce. Then what happens to them after that? So what kind of policies are we creating? So initially, I think firms did not think, when I entered the workforce, firms didn't think it was important for them to actually create women-sensitive policies. A lot has changed in the last 30 years, and now we do have a lot of, I think, policies that are sensitive not just on gender, but also on a number of other areas. For instance, people with disability or people who identify differently, LGBTQ, etc. So all of those things have started to get addressed now. In my company, for instance, we do have a policy. We pay for things like gender reassignment, surgery, etc. So all of those things have started to come now. But then as women get older, I mean, and I think this is talked about in multiple forums, the chief reproductive years for men are also the chief years when they start to actually move up the ladder in the corporate world. And therefore, they have to make choices. And it's not very easy choices for them sometimes. So what do organizations do to help? They try and create a support system. They try and provide childcare at work, for instance. Tech Mahindra provides a buddying system for women on maternity leave, so that they have somebody who's gone through this before and is able to kind of guide them through some of the issues and questions they might be facing, and then make it easier for them to come back once they've gone through and once they've had their child and gone through the maternity leave, etc. But those are all things that they would face. And then as you get senior, there are demands for travel. There are demands for actually attending meetings after work hours and in person, etc. And those are where I think, again, it becomes difficult for women to meet those requirements sometimes. I, for instance, was traveling. And in fact, I remember my first trip to the US in the 90s, a colleague of mine asked me saying, your husband allowed you to come here. This is a New Yorker, very much an American guy asking me that. And he thought, that was a normal question for him. And I looked at him and I said, between my husband and me, there's no question of allowing anyone else to do something. We can request each other, if we want something. But I don't think he presumes to allow me to do anything. But then I was surprised that that question was coming from a person in the US. And then I realized that there were a lot of differences even there. So there were pay differences, and there were, in fact, even attitudes to women managers, etc. I noticed some of the comments being made about women leaders there. And I realized that actually India was probably better. And in the IT world in India, I was getting treated a lot more fairly than I saw some of the women in New York being treated. Yeah, but having said that, and then as we get more senior in the organization, we also tend to downplay our own strengths. As Tina said, we don't put ourselves forward. We have that imposter syndrome coming in. We don't put ourselves forward for promotions if it's not given to us. We assume constraints, and I think, Manaswini, you and I were talking about this. A few years ago, I was doing a fairly big role in managing the banking financial services insurance vertical. And I was also setting up a new business line that we were creating in Australia at that time. And I had to take some time off because I wanted to help my husband, who was going through some issues with his business. And so I talked to my boss and I said, I'd like to resign. And then he said, Padma, why do you want to resign? If you want to take time off, why don't you work part-time? So you still get to do this new line of business and help your husband. And I said, yeah, I never thought of that. So it never occurred to me that I could go and make this offer. So I was assuming a constraint that if I don't work full-time, this job is not available to me. So sometimes we make those kind of assumptions about what is, possible.
Yeah, please carry on.
Go ahead. Yes.
No, carry on. I just didn't mean to.
So yeah, so I think it's important for us to keep our, views open. And some of the things that we face. So, for instance, when it became compulsory for companies to have independent women directors, suddenly there are organizations that are offering training for women to become directors. They never thought it necessary for men to go through training, right? So men seem to have this wonderful ability to become directors overnight, and women have to go through training. But that seems to be what the expectation is. And then organizations, of course, have helped to provide, to try and bridge that gap that is probably non-existent from our perspective, but seems to be there. So similarly, in our organization, we realized that women may not put themselves up for leadership positions or may not see themselves as being eligible for leadership positions. So we created a women leadership program where we identified high performers at the mid-management level and then put them through training programs. Like I said, this is not something that the men seem to need, but this was seen. But the good thing is, because of that, we've identified a number of women at mid-management level who then are being mentored and groomed by a number of both men and women senior to them to take up positions then as they come along. So that's created at least a a good identification of here are the women in the organization you could use to promote. So you don't always have to hire from outside when it comes to senior level positions. So yes, a number of things that, barriers that come, which you have to kind of, I guess, overcome, one after the other. Yeah.
And then thank you. And from your, few words I recognize, mental and your own barriers seem to be one of the biggest ones that block us from probably achieving the best that we can. So Aparna, if you could highlight some that probably you yourself have faced or the ones which you've seen others, in the internal barriers in more than the external. I'm sure this will be quite exciting for the students who are listening in.
Sure. I think when it comes to women, there are so many cliches that are talked about. And now when I sit back and think about the last 20 years that I've been in the workforce, I now find, retrospectively thinking about how many of those cliches I've personally contributed to, right? And had those in my head, and I didn't even realize going in for many years. I think Tina and Padma talked about a few of these, not having the strongest voice. And I see this every single day with women in the workforce. It is not that women are not competent enough or don't have ideas good enough to contribute in a meeting room, but when you're thrown into a meeting room with, probably when you're one of the only women in the room, you tend to shy away from making that point. A lot of times you doubt yourself. You're playing that conversation over in your mind, whether or not you should make that point, because you don't know if it's good enough, worthy enough of the audience that is present. So a lot of times you kind of hold yourself back in a lot of those instances. And what happens is each of those instances becomes a contributing factor to your own success going forward. Because if the words that are not spoken, no one's going to hear them. No one's going to recognize that you're a contributor, probably have done all the background work towards that meeting, but no one's paying any attention. No one's calling you out and asking your opinion just because you don't have that loudest voice in the room. Padma was talking about, women not raising their hands for promotion. This again is something that is I see happening very often in the workplace. There are men who will constantly, every single one-on-one that you have with a team member, they'll say, when is my next promotion? They might not even be eligible just as yet. They might not be doing anything above and beyond what's expected of them, but they'll still be the first to raise that point, to ask when the promotion is going to be, because they think they're already there, right? They were ready yesterday. The cliche about women, not applying to jobs until they meet 90% of the criteria, versus men can probably check 40% of the boxes and they think I'm the greatest for that role. A lot of these cliches, again, I'm not downplaying the contributions that men make, but I just think that there is a huge gap, again, the barriers in our own minds as to what holds us back in terms of even opting ourselves forward, putting ourselves up for the role. A lot of times when I speak to women on our broader teams, and they'd come back and I said, why don't you apply to this role that's open? And they say they have a plethora of reasons as to why they will not. And I say, okay, but these are not, a lot of times those are not problems that you're contributing to. It's not a lack of your own resume that is causing you to not apply to a particular position. And I say, well, why don't you at least put your name in the ring and see how it plays out, at least go through the process. And a lot of times just that singular barrier in your own head of telling yourself, maybe I should just try it out. The outcome, thinking that there is a certainty or a lack of certainty of the outcome itself, holds us back from even throwing our name in the ring. And I think that we see that playing out quite often as well. A lot of women don't talk about their own successes. That's the other thing. You assume that if I have something worthy enough, or if I've done anything that's significant enough, people will know about it anyway. I don't need to, right, blow my own horn. We don't talk about things that we've done. So a lot of, again, I think and Manaswini, I think to your question, and as I was saying earlier, I've found that I was always a very shy student when I was growing up. I was very shy. I was always very quiet. So learning to speak up and speak out has come through a very difficult journey. Has come a very hard way for me. But I do see the importance of, and people had mentors in the organization who kept telling me, unless you speak out, no one's going to listen to you. And it just felt wrong. It just felt wrong that nobody would notice. But I've done all the work. But I've said this to my manager. Why wouldn't they be the one to portray those key messages when the meeting comes up? Why wouldn't that attribution happen? The point is, no one has the time. A lot of people don't really put in the effort to make that attribution happen and for that to be widely known. I think a lot of times we do need to make sure we're fighting that cause ourselves, making sure that you don't have to still be the loudest voice in the room, but make it a point to, even if it is practice, and initially you'll have to probably do it through practice, but when you're going into that meeting, make sure that you have 2 points that you want to make in that front of that audience. And through that practice over a period of time, it becomes a bit more natural and you start to do it a bit more seamlessly. But I think a part of it, the other thing is people underestimate or downplay the effort that it goes into making a transition, either because of your own personality or your circumstances. But a lot of times what the end product that you see is probably not the starting, right, 20 years or 30 years ago. And you have to put in a lot of conscious choice into making those small interactions matter for your voice to be heard, and for your contributions to be noticed before someone will take that plunge and take in that leap of faith on you.
Wonderful. That motivates me to go on LinkedIn more often then. No, but yeah, I see that it seems like, there's this theory going around that women or females have been brought up with this assumption that they have to be perfect. They have to fit a bill. And that probably somewhere down the line makes us maybe a little low on confidence, taking up little less initiative. They'll correct the women more, the girl child more than the boy child. But no, and then several biases, and also this inability to say no. And here I would like Shruti, who's a DI expert, but I think a very, very creative person in the house. And she has a book under her sleeve. And I would like you to talk a little bit about these mental biases that you've seen, and what are your experiences in overcoming them? And if you would like to share a tip as well. And as you speak, maybe I will share some clips of your, doodles that you've created for us to share.
Sure. Thank you for that lovely introduction. And it's incredible to be with this panel of women, very energizing. And I saw lots of us nodding in agreement, right? Because it sounds so true. We've all been through that. One of the aspects, and I had shared this with Professor Manaswini just before, we got into this chat, is in order to be able to say yes to the right things, it's super important to be able to say no to the wrong things. Right? And saying no, while it isn't gender specific, it's applicable to anyone. I think it's important to learn to say no to things. You can create space for the right things in your life, right? And I have a few doodles to just talk about, some places where we say no. A lot of times we don't have the time, right? But we take on too much. And at the end of the day, we're feeling stressed. We're blaming ourselves for not doing a good job. I've called this the time crunch flavor, right? So it looks like the ice cream cone, choco cookies for the summer. Yeah, but I think it's important to be able to say, no, I can't do something now because I have too much on my hands, but I will do it later, right? And with a lot of things that we have seen, be specific about when that later is, right? So saying this month is really busy for me, but it's likely that in April, I will have some time and I will pick it up. And it's very nice if you can follow through and actually pick it up in April. It builds the confidence of the person that you've said no to. And you say no a few times and you follow it up that way, it increases your confidence to be able to say no as well, right? The second one, right? When else can you say no? When you are not the subject matter expert, right? So someone comes to you and this is not your area of expertise, but you're hesitant to say, hey, no, I don't want to do it because am I going to look silly? Am I going to look stupid? There are so many things, right? But I think it's really important to say, hey, I don't know everything. I don't think I am the right person to be doing this, but you know what? I know somebody else who is. Right, and make that introduction, say I will introduce you to that person, set up a meeting, do something else. But I think it's important to be able to identify that this is not something that I can add value to. Let's not waste everybody's time, but I will introduce you to somebody else who can do a better job of it, right? And free up some of your own time. Third category, and I think a lot of women have seen this, right? It's the very large pie. We just take on too much, right? There are things at home, there are things at work, there are things that your spouse wants, your parents want. There's just too much, right? So sometimes I think it's important to say, hey, I can't do so much, but I can do a smaller portion instead. right? And with all of these, I've sort of said, how do you quantify, right? So you can say, when there was this vaccination drive, I can't do all of this, but I can tell you what portion of the job that I can do, right, in our apartment complex, for instance. So I think it's important to be able to quantify. The last one, and I think this is a really important one, is I call it the not cross bar, where we're saying, sorry, I won't do that because that's crossing a personal boundary, right? And you wouldn't believe how many, and here I'm going to be gender specific, women have a problem with saying no when a boundary is crossed, right? Listen to that little voice which is telling you, this is making me cross a personal boundary. I think that's important to have the self-awareness to know that. And B, have the confidence to just say no. Right? And this is the only one which does not have a but, let me introduce you, I'll do it later, nothing. It's just a simple no. And I think oftentimes when you do that, you think that people are going to, undermine your importance. I think it's quite the contrary, really, right? People tend to say, I respect you, you understand what your boundaries are and you won't cross them. And you make it a healthier self for your own, and you're creating space to say yes to the right things, right? So that's one example that I have. I think there's the premise of the book is, if you go to a shopping mall, right, you have one finite resource, which is time, and you want to maximize the number of things that your money can buy you, right? Sorry, finite resource is money, and you want to buy as many things as you can. What if life were a shopping experience, right? You have one finite resource, which is time, and you want to maximize contentment in your basket of life. Right? And I have a slightly contrarian view to things that have been spoken. Career may not be the only item in your basket, right? So in your basket, if you have family, if you've got hobbies, if you've got spirituality, health, name it, right? It's your basket. And contentment is an internal measure, right? It's not success that the outside world perceives it. Hey, you've got a certain title, you have so much money, you have this car, but it's a purely internal measure where you say, I am content, right? When you go home, you get to take your basket and your basket alone. There's no point in looking at your neighbor's basket and saying, ooh, they have a shiny packet of career, and I have such a small packet of career. But guess what? I've got family and health and spirituality, and it makes me happy. Right? So how do we maximize our contentment given our finite resource of time? Right? So that's the premise of everything that's there in the book. It's not like we are multidimensional. I think life is also multidimensional.
Fantastic, and thank you. I mean,
Beautifully
got
put.
to the core of our all discussions right at the middle of our conversation. We didn't have to, get to the end for it. I wanted to speak with Tina, if you would like to chip in and maybe give a few, let's say, pointers to the listeners, men and women, and let's say particularly men. Ideally, if you would ask me, I would have had a male participant also here to have the complete spectrum of representation. But if there would be any suggestion that you would like to give, what would it be? And since I don't want to jump in again and again in your conversation, I also want you to tell and highlight, Aparna has mentioned about Padma did mention about several policies that people, companies have taken up. And, sometimes I feel these policies, though with all the great intent, they are implemented just for the letter, but not for the spirit. For example, women on board, and several others. So what would be that one suggestion of a policy that you think should be implemented? And what would there be any particular advice that you would give to men and women? We have a lot of time, we will talk quickly.
Yeah. I think it's first important for us, no matter where we are, whether it's a manufacturing unit in rural India or it's the corporate multinational that you're sitting in Bangalore, inequity exists, and there have been systemic inequities that have marred the journey and progress of women in the workplace. I think that acknowledgement from the leadership to your employer, the person who's talking about your employer brand, should know and acknowledge, because that affects how you are perceived as a brand and how you as a leader look at gender inequity in the workplace. And I don't think that's the lens many organizations are using today, right? If I were to say, hey, these are the areas of focus an organization or individuals need to focus on, especially if you are in positions of power and influence, I would say representation. Representation matters. I mean, the more you look at, and there is data that says that after the pandemic, we've seen more women quit the workplace. And then, with the work flexi work policies, all of that coming in, you see more women getting in, but you're also seeing a trend where senior women are quitting the workplace, especially those in leadership positions. And this is data that's telling you something, right? So when you look at data internally in your organization. What's your pipeline? What's the gender mix in your pipeline, right from your grads to your senior leadership? Look at your attrition data. There is a lot that's being said about your grade change data. Look at your grade change data. Who's been given a promotion? Who's not being given a promotion? But having affirmative action, like saying that this is a goal that we as an organization have, and trust me, it works. When you have an affirmative action saying, we want to be X percentage of women in the workplace by the end of whatever. Everyone in the organization works towards it. Every functional leader, every person is focused on that. And it has brought about transformative change. So that's definitely one. I think leadership accountability is very important. When a leader is accountable for gender equity, it sort of really trickles down. I call this the snowball effect. A lot of you all must have heard about it. But it trickles down to every aspect of the organization, even up to the grad that you're hiring, because that will be part of your onboarding. When you do onboarding, it will be part of the information that's being shared. And this also needs to be backed by measurable performance goals by, for other leaders in the organization, where gender equity is one of the things that is measured in your performance reviews. It's important to address the leaky pipeline. It is, 7 in 10 working women quit and they never get back. And restarter programs are a great way to bring back women into the workplace. And it has worked immensely well in many, many industries and in many, many organizations. So bringing back that, Padma did talk about it. She said that so many women quit tech. And this is also because of, a lot of biases and a lot of social norms that are there, right? That the caregiver role is that of the woman. The women plays a caregiver role. And so how do you challenge these, and what can organizations do, right? So right from training to internship programs, ThoughtWorks has an amazing returnee program called Vapasi. Accenture has a career reboot program. Infosys has Restarter, and I'm sure all of the the organizations that our panelists are representing here today have something similar. But that becomes important. It's also very, very important to build your pipeline of leaders. It's not going to happen by default. People spoke about, here the panelists spoke about imposter syndrome. They spoke about saying no to a leadership position because there's so much to be taken care of, right? So having a very intentional leadership development program, it says that a recent Randstad report says 50% of all working women leave the workforce between the junior and middle management, which means all of your potential leaders, 50% of them are actually quitting the workplace. So what you're left with is a very small percentage of women, who are your potential leaders. So this is something definitely organizations need to look into. And this is specifically for the men who are attending today, allies and taking men along the journey, being an ally and a visible and active advocate and sponsor of gender equity, you become change agents. And you actually question many of the biases and discriminations that men have also faced. And I always say this, right, in a lot of forums, that I feel sad for the men. They have been forced into such gendered norms themselves that it's so difficult to come out of it. You're tough. You are the breadwinner of the family. You cannot be the caregiver. You cannot be soft-spoken. You need to be the tough parent. You need to be the one who's creating the rules and the norms. This reflects in the workplace as well. And so being able to do that as well and investing in communities, I think that circle of sisterhood, the employee resource groups, building those circles is very, very important. But review, rework, and sponsor. Relook at your policies, relook at your programs. Today you need to move away. In fact, many organizations are moving away from maternity policies to parental leave policies or parental policies. So it becomes gender neutral, and it also makes the role of the parent, and here I'm talking about the male here, or I'm not looking at the gender spectrum here, but I'm looking at the man here, who also becomes responsible for caregiving, because you are giving
the caregiver leave. So there is so much that can be reworked from your policy standpoint, that policies play an important role, but policies should never be set in stone. Like we just spoke about the multiple identities we bring to the workplace. Our lived experiences are different. So if something the policy does not cover, please make amends or try and fix your policy. Many years back, our maternity leave policy was 6 months, even before it was the norm in India. But our adoptive leave policy was just 3 months. And so one of our employees who was adopting twins came and said, how does me being an adoptive mother make me different from a biological mother? That was the only question she asked. And we changed the policy, and it was 6 months for everyone, including surrogacy and adoptive parents as well. So I think the lens that we need to look at DEI today is change. How can we bring about social impact and social change within our workplaces? And it's possible by also tying it into your overall CSR and ESG policy. The whole thing around educating, building awareness around various aspects of gender equity, unconscious bias, and the impact it has on our workplaces and life at large, I think is very, very necessary in today's world, especially, in institutions like this.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting all of these. And I think it's brought to the notice the importance of a good leadership, a more agile leadership who can, work around with changing environments and be willing and be more connected with, the company and the people that they're working with. There are a lot of questions coming in, and I don't want to stop ourselves from answering them, so that, the kids would benefit a lot by hearing them live. There's a specific question for women in finance, and I think, Parna, maybe you could help in and chip in and answer. They say, how difficult or easy is it to be a woman in finance and management, as there is a perception that women are not as good in finance or numbers, etc. While you answer this, I'm not going to resist. I'm going to not resist. And I'm going to ask you, tell us also some of those, policies that you have seen that have worked. Sure. So that's the question that you have, which is how difficult or easy it is to be a woman in finance.
Yeah, so you're right. When you do look around in the workplace, and I started my career in finance, I was in the US. I worked in the US for multiple years, and then I was in Singapore. I have to say, again, going back to my theme on cliches, when I looked around the office, it was predominantly men. When I was on my way to the office and getting off the trains, it was a sea of black suits all around you, right? So you, in a way, you're kind of getting used to the narrative that you're a small segment in that larger ocean. So yes, it is. Finance is predominantly a men's world. I think it still is, especially for men. When you look at the upper portion of the pyramid, it's predominantly still men. I have to say that, we talked earlier about having role models and having women that you can look up to. Why is it important? I think it just gives you an impression, and it gives you a sense of possibility. When you see somebody who is perhaps like you in some way, at least in a few ways, you see yourself as in that position at some point in time, and that becomes a possibility in your own mind. And then you get to the part of how do I make it happen, rather than can it happen. And I think that shift in your own mindset is very critical. So yes, finance is there's a much larger proportion of men, but that said, I think there are, again, even within finance, there are substreams where there's a lot of women. Typically there's a lot of women in marketing, right? And that proportion is actually quite flipped. When you look at marketing within financial services, about 70% are women compared to men in HR, etc. Right? So there are streams, areas where creativity is more important. You'd see that women are more represented in some of those functions. But then again, I think, like I said, it comes back to believing that it is possible, and then you find options within that as to what align with your goals and aspirations, as to what you want to do. Don't try to fit a mold. That's something that I've always tried to, I never did, right? I never found myself to be fitting that mold. And so I had to find alternate ways of how do I still get to where I want to be without having to necessarily completely fundamentally change myself. And it helped. I think it helps to the, just talking to people, looking at what other organizations are doing, because again, it gives you the realm of possibilities that you probably couldn't think of just on your own, or couldn't come up with solutions that you're probably struggling with. So really have a circle of people that you can depend on. Coming back to diversity, I think diversity of thought. Surround yourself with a circle of people that are different from you and can offer you different perspectives than the way that you're thinking about it. I think typically we choose our friends who look like us, talk like us, think like us. Having a circle that is very diverse from your own thinking is hugely beneficial, because it really challenges your fundamental thinking in ways that you would not imagine. So I would throw that as a tip to, difficult as it might be initially to face some of those challenging thoughts thrown at you. I would say, surround yourself with a bunch of people that you can go to and talk about diverse topics, who will give you render you a very, very different perspective than your own. Manaswini, I think your other question was on policies.
On policies, and there are these questions that are coming in, and though we're only talking about policies, but yeah, they want to know what are the best practices that you've deployed at workplace that can help drive equity at work. So yeah, you can choose. You can tell us, let's say, one that worked and one that didn't, or anyway.
Yeah. So broadly, again, I'll go back to something that Tina was talking about, and I think affirmative action is hugely important. The caveat to that I would add, though, is it's very important to call out what specifically someone has done as to why they're getting that role, why they're getting the promotion, why they're getting a step up. Because otherwise what happens is, especially when you have a metric that you're being tagged against, the typical reason, that the attribution that happens in people's minds is, well, she's a diversity candidate, she's a woman, well, of course, that's why she's getting that promotion. And I think that's very important to address the why. So one of the things that we've done, as we, at every promotion discussion, we have a list of candidates that come up for promotion, and we say, well, let's go back and look at if there were these three men from, these specific types of roles that they're doing who are put up for promotion. Let's look at the other women who probably meet the same eligibility criteria, but are not put up for promotion. Is it just because they haven't asked for it, right? Are managers forgetting about these contributors on their teams, and because they're probably a bit more invisible? So that's one of the things that we do. Make sure that we have a checklist, and we go through, well, who else might be eligible and hasn't come up for promotion? Why haven't they come up for promotion? Question those, be that. And I think as women who make it to, those positions of leadership, I think it's imperative upon each of us to make sure that we ask those questions, that we are the voice of reason in that room, that say, why is it that somebody else was left out when there are three other men that are present in that promotion discussion.
Fantastic. Please carry on.
No, go ahead.
No, so thank you. These are solid, actionable points, putting those things out there for you, having good role models. I see Shruti is raising hand. I have a question for Padma, also written here by someone who wants to know about tech innovators and how to be, is the tech innovative, in the tech industry, pitched against women, but we'll come to that after Shruti, your comment. You've raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks so much, Manaswini. So one thing that I've seen in Adobe is recently we had a round of promotions announced, right? And a lady who's away on maternity leave was promoted to the role of director. Now, in a lot of organizations, we talk about supportive work culture. How do they come back to the workplace? Are they going to come back or not? Here is a company which is acknowledging, saying, you do a fantastic job and we can't wait for you to do a larger role when you come back, right? And it's so inspiring to everyone, because that's authentic leadership, right? It's not saying I meet a metric of 30%, I give you a crash, I give you flexible work hours, but also saying, I will promote you when you are not there. Just because you're not around doesn't mean, we don't feel your presence. I thought that was a fantastic thing that I've not seen in too many other companies, right? Promoting while you're away on maternity leave. Sorry, that's all.
Fantastic. Yeah, please, Padma, over to you. And we'll come and touch base on this issue of the importance of leadership at the top, and what happens if females drop off, and how does one deal with it. But before we get there, I wouldn't want this student to go empty-handed without an answer.
Sure, sure. If I may just add one point to what Aparna and Shruti talked about. So you obviously have to handle it in various ways. We've done things like even changing our job descriptions to see whether they make more men apply than women because of the way they sound. So looking at things like that. Obviously, forcing your recruitment teams to bring a specific number of women CVs because they may not actually go out and source enough women's CVs. So if you force them to do that, then it makes the pool much larger for you to choose from. And never obviously compromising on the quality of the candidate you're bringing in, but just making sure that there's an available pool to pick from. And similarly, the promotion, absolutely. And that is something that we also do where we actually train our promotion panels to say, this is how you have to treat a person who's on maternity. You can't just write them off because they're away on maternity, etc. And the last one is on, getting these, obviously the restart programs and things that a lot of organizations have, but also training some of our project and program managers as to how to deal with diverse teams and what kind of sensitivity you have to have, etc. And how, you can't let your biases and perceptions color the way you treat people in your teams. So all those things are obviously important. And Manaswini and I talked about how we'd done some polls earlier where women talked about having more empathetic program and project managers if they, for them to succeed, etc. So, okay, on the innovation front, I think, Tina, I think you brought that up. The fact that, diversity metrics have a great influence on how innovative, creative, problem-solving an organization is. And, so obviously that is, gender diversity is highly important. I think the question that is being asked here is,
does gender lens bestow unique skills? I mean, does it give you a special edge?
So I think, yes, having diversity in general gives you perspective. And perspective is extremely important for innovation. You need to be able to cater to audiences with your product that you may not have thought of, or think about use cases for your product that you may not have thought of. And if you have a very, very similar set of people innovating, they're not going to get the benefit of that perspective. So definitely, I think diversity is extremely important for innovation. Now, what's happening on the innovation front, startups and startup funding? I think there was, again, a lot of statistics that showed that women startups were not getting as much funding, were not getting as much mentoring, etc. First of all, the number of women starting startups was lower, and then the number, obviously the funding itself was the issue. I think a lot of that has started to get addressed. We are still probably only addressing the tip of the iceberg now, but even including things like the cells at IMB that assist women entrepreneurs is extremely important. So the more we get, I guess, products and ideas that come from a diverse set of people, including women, the better life is going to be for all of us.
Fantastic. Thank you.
If I may just add to that, 50% of the world's population, they are your users, they are your customers. If you do not have them as part of your team, you are going to build products and services that just do not cater to them. And it's the same with people with disability or the queer community or anybody who's neurodiverse, right? You need to have representation, and these are the people who need to be part of the team that's building the solution, the product. And only then would you be able to come up with the right solution. I think there was this recent example, right, of researchers in Sweden who, for the first time, made the female crash test dummy. Earlier, just everything about the crash test dummy was male-based or male-focused, right from the anatomy, size, body, everything. And that's the reason why, when they looked back at data, more women are likely to die of an accident than men while driving a car. And so first time Sweden developed this, and then it's likely that is going to change that world totally. So it's very important that perspective is brought in.
Yeah, Padma, you had something to say, add?
Yes, just want to add, Tina, yes, excellent point. Same thing for bulletproof vests. They're not really made for the women's body or for Asian bodies, etc. And there was one very interesting one, I think 2019, the International Space Station wanted to do an all-woman maneuver by having, an all-woman team go out of the space station and do some repairs. And they had to put it off by a week because they realized they didn't have enough spacesuits for women at that time. So the fact that you have, the astronauts there, but they don't have enough spacesuits is absolutely
Fantastic.
dangerous.
Yeah,
So,
no, but it's a fantastic position to be in. I mean, it's just a matter of time that you will get that, but getting astronauts ready takes more larger time than.
yes.
Yeah, but thank you for putting that in. And there are a lot of interesting questions. And I think one which I would like, Shruti to answer is the one which, how do you deal with a situation where in workforce or even otherwise, where you've been pulled up just to fit that, that mandatory requirement of having a woman on board? How does one deal with that? A board or in a committee, or that particular requirement that the company has put in. So how does one deal with that?
I think Aparna was the one who was talking about cliches, right? I'm going to use one as well. I think actions speak louder than words, right? So it's important to say, here's the content that I bring in. And if it's a numbers role, show how your numbers play for you. If it's data, show data. And I think authenticity, right? So I bring my authentic self to work every day. I deliver results. Maybe you picked me initially because there was this thing that you wanted to tick off, but after that, my performance has been just as good or better than anybody else, right? So I love the concept of performance-based evaluation. And also saying that I will prove myself because I believe I've gotten here not just because of that, right? And what somebody else thinks of you, and maybe it's something that gets better as you grow older, becomes less and less important than what you think about yourself, right? You knowing that you've given it your best shot, intent being most important, and then you put all of your energy behind that intent and work smart, work hard, right? And let the numbers speak for themselves.
Yeah. So one, Shruti, you're probably the youngest who graduated out of campus, out of campus, and more in touch with the students than probably the others. One thing that you want to tell, I mean, it's not the end, but one thing that you want to tell the kids that are listening in, male and female, both, that they could do maybe to make their lives a little more, equitable, if you may.
Absolutely. I think two things, if you don't mind, right? Career is a marathon. It's not a 100-meter dash. There will be moments when you can go really fast. There will be moments when you want to pause, take a sip of water. There will be moments when you just want to stop as well, which is perfectly fine, but it's a marathon. It's a long, long journey, right? So I think that's really important. I had another very interesting stat during my times. The average time you spend on your first job is usually 6 months. Right? On campus, especially, there is such a big thing about day zero jobs, investment banking, strategy consultants. But 6 months in, people tend to change industries, geographies, what have you, right? So sometimes that can seem like this is, the be all and end all. Oh no, I didn't get my daisy job. But hey, hold on, life is a marathon, right? And it does get better. 6 months later, perspective may have changed.
So I'm going to use this example in class, if you don't mind. Yeah?
Oh, please do. Please do.
All right, Padma, you had something to pitch in, please.
Yeah, no, also I think this quota thing is an important one to address. So the quota is just making people aware. You're nowhere near 50% in the quotas anyway. You're probably trying to get there, right? So it's doing is bring attention to the an area, and you're saying I want to achieve some kind of equity here. So that's all it's doing. But it doesn't say you have to compromise on quality. What you're saying when you think that the woman is hired because of quota is you're saying you don't think there are enough women who are capable enough to actually do the job. And I think that's absolutely wrong. So in our company, for instance, we have 40% women on the board, right? Which is actually slightly higher than the number of women we have in the organization overall. But the mandate is to have one independent or one woman director. We have 4 independent directors. Out of 6 independent directors, we have 4. So 2/3 of our independent directors actually are women. And it's not, obviously, we weren't trying to fill a quota there. We have got some of the best women or some of the best professionals on our board.
Thank you so much. And I think, Aparna, you also in our conversation had something to say about how do you deal when you're picked up, how does one go about, does one accept this offer or not? And I think I remember in our conversation, you had something to tell me.
Yeah, so for one of my, I had a recruiter reach out to me a bunch of years back, and I wasn't even looking for a role, but they called me, and then through the conversation, they were trying to sell me the role, and they obviously, it's a recruiter, so they had to spill the beans, and they said, well, we need diversity representation, and that's why we absolutely need you to apply to the role. And I said, I'm not even interested if that's the reason you're calling me. If you think I'm not qualified enough for the role, I'd be happy for you to share the resumes of 4 other men that you think are competent enough for the role. And I will show you as to why I am as good or better than them. But it's if the sole reason why you want me to apply is because I'm a woman, I'm not even interested. So I think you do need to call people out a lot of times on their own biases, and probably the recruiter didn't even realize, because it's so inherent to the way that they look at these things, and just meeting the metrics of what they've been assigned tasks to do. But I think you do need to, it's my way of showing the bias, right? And you do need to call people out and say, well, I am qualified enough for the role that you're talking to me about, and so I might apply, but that's not going to be because of my gender. And I think going back to what Shruti was saying on actions speak louder than words, I think it is true that women do have to work harder to prove themselves, to make that point, to convince other people within the organization and probably society as a whole, that you are good enough to be where you are. And so be it, if that's kind of the price that you need to pay to be able to have an equal footing, then perhaps at least in this day and age, we're still at the point where we still need to do that. And I do think that is true. I do see a lot of women in the organizations that I've worked in, where they work really hard on the job, and they work really hard in balancing other aspects of their life, which is also equally important to them. And they feel like the onus of balancing a lot of that is really on their shoulders, when there's nobody else to supplement that.
Yeah, I know it's not easy, and but the good part is that we're loving this conversation, and but at the same time, I don't want to extend more than what you guys have committed to. But before we end, I would like you to highlight what does it mean to you? What does diversity mean to you? One thing that's coming out clearly out from our conversations is that it's multidimensional. It's not just about gender, caste, economic strata, but I think it's more about the mindset. I mean, women sometimes can be the biggest gatekeepers themselves of the things that are happening, which are not good for women themselves. So the women are the biggest gatekeepers to biases against women. So it's mindset that really matters. So before we end and wrap up, and please, I would go across the panel. What do you mean? What does diversity mean to you? And if there is anything with the last few words that you would like to share, any piece of advice, because talk is cheap, please go ahead and share. So I'll start with Padma, and then Tina, Aparna, and then Shruti.
So I think diversity in my case means being open to any kind of person on the other side, and be able to embrace and accept them for who they are without judging them. Difficult to do, but I think as you start realizing why you're making certain decisions, or why you kind of box people into categories, then you start seeing your own biases and try and overcome them. So that's important to do. The advice that I would give, and this is something that I learned when I read about what was happening with the Obama administration. I believe the Obama administration for the first time had a lot more women in it. And therefore, instead of having the 1 or 2 token women that are there in a room full of 10 men, and all of us, we think, have been in that situation, Aparna talked about how we find it difficult, therefore, to voice our opinions there. And even when we do voice our opinions, quite often when the woman makes a point, it gets overlooked, and then there's a man who says the same thing, and then that gets amplified, and you say, but I just said that, and how come you didn't listen to me? So what the women in the Obama administration did was they ganged up. And I think to your point, Manaswini, I don't think we always put barriers against each other. I think we can very well gang up as well. So what they did was they made sure that whenever a woman made a point in the room and it wasn't heard, they would all chime in and say, I think you should listen to what she said. She made a great point there. Let's consider this. So once you have 4 or 5 people amplifying that voice, then it gets heard. So that's what we can do as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Tina, your last few words, and what does diversity mean to you?
Yeah. For me, diversity means those who are not represented, those who don't have a seat on the table. or those who are underrepresented. And I think that is something that's the lens that we need to look, whether it is in our classrooms, whether it is in our workplaces, whether it's the board, the leadership team, wherever we go, politics. But if we do have underrepresentation, we need to challenge, question, and work towards, somewhere leveling that field. I often talk about this book, The Athena Doctrine. I don't know how many of you all may have read this research-based book on how women, and men who think like them will rule the future. So this book goes back to 64,000 people were surveyed from 13 nations. And once they did these surveys, and this was across multiple areas and forums, the findings were that all the qualities that were defined as feminine qualities, and even those were vouched by the participants of the survey, those were the qualities that were needed for leadership for tomorrow. So I don't think we should shy away from, or follow the male norms of leadership, or the male traits of leadership to be part of any group or any workplace. And I think we should be very comfortable with who we are and the differences that we wish to bring to the workplace. Yeah.
Thank you for highlighting that it's the mindset that matters, that we are looking for a greater mindset diversity. Aparna, your last few any advice, and what does diversity mean to you?
Yeah, so I think though we're talking about right through the gender lens here, as we talk about diversity today, I look at diversity as a broader spectrum, and for me, it's more about bringing in the diversity of thought. Both, I think, like I talked about this earlier, to challenge our own thinking, but also just even from a pure work standpoint. I think there can be a lot of benefit from looking at business problems and differently, and to be able to solve them through a very differentiated thought process. And I think there's been enough research that's been done to show how women think differently and how they can contribute towards ideas and channel those thoughts very differently. And I think so it's imperative to bring in, just to make sure that we are covering the spectrum of not just people in the workplace, but also as our end customers. There's a large population of our customers who are women. And so to be able to service them appropriately, I think we do need to sit back and think about it as women, to make sure that we are catering to all segments of society. I think more specifically, just in terms of what can we do in the workplace, while everyone, I think all of the panelists, Manaswini, we are all women sitting and talking about this. It would be amiss to not call men to be an equal party to this whole conversation. In fact, I think that this is not going to work unless you have men that are invested into making sure that we have an equal footing, that they believe that there is value in having women in positions of leadership and at all levels, having representation at all levels within the organization. So really imperative to bring men into this conversation and make sure that we have avenues created to have them as allies for women. I think there is a movement called He for She that a lot of organizations drive, and I think that's critical. And the point is to find those male champions. A lot of times they exist within organizations, but it's probably a bit more subtle. But to bring it out to the forefront, for men to talk about why do they think it's important? What are the actions that they're taking? Affirmative action again. What are you doing to make that change happen broadly within the organization? So I think He for She is something that I've seen as it's a big step in that process.
Thank you for highlighting and forcefully putting it out there, the miss that we made. And I think for the next time, we'll as I mentioned before, the more diverse, literally a more diverse setting doesn't mean all women, for God's sake. It means people of all kinds. All right. So Shruti, last few words, and your alumni is hearing you. Anything you want to tell us, what you think that they should do? Any piece of advice? And what diversity means to you too.
Yeah, I think differences sometimes are skin deep, right? So what you can see is a different skin color, different accent, different gender. But as you go deeper and deeper, we've got similar fears, we've got similar ambitions, things make us happy, things make us sad, and you realize that there is a oneness, right? Irrespective of what these apparent differences are. And sometimes staying in an organization for slightly long, and this is again, people are used to jumping from one to another. When you stay for slightly long, you tend to see those more clearly, right? You see beyond what is skin deep, and you go slightly deeper and connect as human beings. So it's not just male, women, it could be European, it could be your sexual orientation, it could be a myriad things, right? So the more time that you spend, you sort of realize that there is a oneness to all of us. And you connect at that deeper level rather than just what is apparent to the eye.
Incredible. And I mean, somehow I remember saying something very similar when we had a podcast on diversity in business, and I ended it exactly with this, with a quotation from some Vedic chant which said that we are all one, that we know, and when we recognize that, I think the ability to be compassionate, to lead more compassionately, building people, building organizations, motivating, having he's for she's would be just very natural. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Somehow it felt as if there were different faces speaking the same words that we were feeling. And I have a feeling that though we have run out of time, we feel the need to continue, but we would not do that. It would be lovely to have you guys over on campus sometime and have this discussion on face-to-face. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Over to the students and the organizers, if they want to add anything, say something in their closing remarks.
Yeah, I'll take over. So on behalf of Women in Management, I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere appreciation to the panelists, Tina ma'am, Padma ma'am, Aparna ma'am, and Shruti ma'am for this session. And we would also like to thank Manaswini ma'am for the time and effort she took out to moderate the session. Most of us on the call would be joining corporate in the next 1 or 2 months. And I think this session has been enlightening in terms of the internal and external barriers we might face in the corporate and how important it is to have role models at work. And we are really grateful for the valuable insights that you have shared with us. I think we've become more aware about the glass ceiling that all of us might have to face. We appreciate the effort you put in for preparing for the session and taking out time to answer our questions from the audience. Finally, I would also like to thank the audience for attending and actively participating in the session. We appreciate your questions, comments, and feedback. Thank you so much for joining. Ma'am, you're on mute.
I said thank you so much, and that's it. Yeah. Thank you to everybody to
Thank
join.
you. Thank you.
All best.
Thank you. Thanks so
you,
much for
everyone.
having us.
Bye-bye. Thank you for your
Thank you.
time.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.